Hello, welcome to Jack Knits, and today we're going to learn how to do the purl stitch. Now, along with the knit stitch, the purl stitch is really the foundation of all knitting stitches. Pretty much all stitches are really a variation of either the knit or the purl stitch. So once you have practiced and mastered both the knit and purl stitch, you are well on your way to becoming a very proficient knitter. So let's learn the purl stitch today. What I've started here is just a swatch of knitting where I've knitted one row, and then I turn it over and I purled the second row, and then I knitted a row, and then I purled a row, and that is called the stockinette stitch. You'll see that it produces this standard look that we've all know of knitting, and that is, again, knitting one row and purling the next. So I've already knitted a row here, so I'm ready to do a purl row stitch. So let's turn it over for our purl knitting side. This side has kind of a bumpy texture to the back. And now I'm going to do the purl side. So again, I'm going to show, as I did with a knitting video, and if you do need a refresher on how to knit, please refer to my how to knit video for the knit stitch. I will have a link to that in the description below. So please review that and practice the knit stitch before you tackle the purl stitch. So again, with the purl stitch, there are two ways to do it. One is with holding your working yarn in your left hand, and the other is with working it with your working yarn in your right hand. And I will show you both ways again. I'm going to start by using the working yarn in my left hand for the purl stitch. And again, what I like to do for purling and knitting is I like to have a little tension in my left hand. So I start by wrapping the yarn around my pinky and then my forefinger. So I have it kind of wrapped around my palm of my hand to give that tension of yarn flowing through my fingers for each stitch. Okay, so now for when you do a knit stitch, this working yarn here from my finger is underneath this needle in my left hand. But for the purl stitch, you're going to want this working yarn here to be on top of this needle. So I'm going to take my finger and I'm going to move that yarn to the top of my needle. So now it's on top. And then with my right hand and my empty needle, I am not going to insert it like a knit stitch from the left to the right. I am going to insert it into my stitch from the right to the left, but now also on top of the needle, not underneath, but on top of the needle, and also to the left and underneath of this working yarn here. So I've got it just like this. And that puts me in the right position to wrap my needle around that yarn, bring my finger forward, so it kind of makes that yarn taunt against that stitch. So I can slip that tip of the needle through from the front now to the back and slip it off the needle. Okay, let's look at that again very slowly. My needle, right hand needle, right to left on top of that needle, but to the left of that yarn. So I can pick up that strand of yarn, bring my finger forward to keep it nice and taut, and through that hole, front to back, and slip it off. Okay, insert top and left. Bring it up, through, and off. You can do that just a few more times, nice and slow for you to watch the direction of how you are pulling and slipping in and out of those stitches for the purl stitch. Try to keep a consistent tension in your knitting as you go. Okay, so now I've knitted several stitches with my working yarn in my left hand. So now let's switch and use it, put that working yarn in my right hand. So I'm going to drop this, bring it over here to my right hand side. Okay, so now with my working yarn in my right hand, with a knit stitch, as I mentioned before, your working yarn is underneath your needle. But with the purl stitch, I want this yarn on top of that needle. So before I do a purl stitch, I want to make sure I loop this yarn to the top of my right hand needle so it's resting on top. So now I can insert my needle into that next stitch from the right to the back on top of that needle. Then I'm going to take my yarn, working yarn, wrap it around that needle, pull it nice and tight so it gives it a nice snugness there, and then push that needle back through that hole and off my needle. Okay? So again, insert it from the right to the left on top of the needle, take my working yarn, wrap it around that needle, pull it kind of snug, and slip it off. Insert, wrap it around, pull it snug, and bring it through that loop from the front to the back. You'll notice that I'm a little looser with my knitting when I do it this method, and a little more awkward as the other method is my preferred method. So bear with my awkwardness in this method. Okay, so that is the purl stitch. And you see that it continued to do this pretty stockinette stitch because I purled that last row. So to continue with this pattern, I would then knit the next row. So that is the purl stitch. I hope you found this purling tech tutorial helpful. If so, please like and don't forget to subscribe. You'll receive notifications of new videos all about knitting tips and stitches and creative patterns. Thanks for watching. Happy knitting!